In a world that's always changing, there is one thing that never changes: God's unchanging Word. And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in this edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, December 24th, 2021. For many people in the world, it's Christmas weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we got a lot more other information we want to bring to everyone today. We're going to begin with H.R. 550. Could this be another Trojan horse? We introduced the concept a few years ago of a bill that was passed and then completely passed by the Supreme Court of another Trojan horse. We're going to bring that back into mind and tell you about this one. Then the renewal. Is this a spiritual solution for our nation? There'll be thousands of people who say it is. We'll talk about that. And then we're going to end up on program, and our nuggets portion is God's covenant for America. We're going to show how that ties into the renewal. All right, so now let's get right into it. We're going to begin with, you can't make this stuff up. Here's a question that used to be asked that everybody thought was really silly. Can men become pregnant? Well, the answer is going to surprise you because you see, this world has changed. Can men become pregnant? This is actually from Healthline. Is that possible? Look at the answer they brought in. Yes. All right, let me stop there for just a second. You might have thought it was no. And if you know 6,000 years, it was no. But not no more, not in the world's changing today. Yes, it is possible for men to become pregnant and to give birth to children of their own. In fact, it's probably more common than you might think. Well, I dare say, I've never seen one that I've known. This is the way to explain it. In order to explain, we'll need to break down some common misconceptions about how we understand the term man. Not all people who are assigned male at birth, A, M, A, B. You notice the alphabets? Every time you talk about a story, it's got an alphabet now. Identify as men. So you might have been born a man, but that doesn't mean you're a man. Those who are, they're called cisgender. That may have just expanded your vocabulary if you're wondering what in the world a cisgender is. Conversely, some people who are assigned female at birth identify as men. Unbelievable. These folks may be transgender men or transmasculine people. Hey, you know, I actually read it with a straight face. Couldn't finish it up. This is insane. This is the world we're living in. And worse than that, these people now have moved into public office or redefining the dictionary, and they're redefining how people act in life and how they go to school. Unbelievable. You know what's different, though, is that when you go to the doctor, you got to go in the hospital, they have no problem identifying what you are. Anyway, let's move on. Australia. We brought this out just last week. We're trying to show how everything's changing around the country because of COVID. This was called Australia's forced safe house for the unvaxxed, right? Now, you would think that couldn't happen in America. Just hold on to your hat. We can talk about something in just a couple of minutes. We brought this out. Germany locked down the unvaccinated people. Australia orders nationwide lockdown for the unvaccinated. The Dutch government is going to extend evening lockdown till next year, especially for the unvaccinated. So now today, Tuesday, as we tape this program, sometime this afternoon, we're going to hear our president, who knows what he's going to be saying about this. But they brought out the news is in America, if you're unvaxxed, to get ready for a very dark winter with a lot of death. Anyway, you can't make that up either. Now, the question we have here, are all of these the foundations for the beast power to buy and to sell? Now, we brought this one out last week too. I want to build from this. This was a prayer request that came from one of our listeners in Canada. The New Brunswick Minister of Health wants to issue more regulations. No jab, no groceries. Well, someone else from Canada must have saw that because they sent us this video of what's going on with someone who didn't have a vaccination, was simply going to a farmer's market to try to buy some food. Let's play that video.
No.
Yeah, we need proof of vaccines.
I need proof of vaccination to get food in Canada.
Are you videotaping us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. So welcome to Artscape Witchwood Barnes. This is a performance and event space.
And you're preventing me from getting food in Canada.
We do have a shopping service that's available.
You're preventing me from getting food? How am I supposed to feed?
I'm not actually preventing you.
You are. You're saying I can't go in?
Yeah,
We
I
have
am
a shopping
saying
service
that.
that's available so that you can get
Are you the manager?
No, the
Who's-
manager works Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. I'm happy to connect you with
Yeah,
her.
I want to connect to the manager. What's his name?
Her name
Her name.
is Carla Ritchie.
Carla Ritchie.
And all of her information is there.
So this is the lady that's enforcing fascism at your.
No, we are following the province of Ontario's legislation.
Where do they say you ban people from having food?
We are not saying that at all. But,
You are. There's food here, and you're banning me from having food.
sir, I'm going to have to
Vaccination?
No, I don't have vaccination. But this is segregation. You're segregating people. You're not letting me have food. Like you're not letting me get food. This is ridiculous.
You want
in
me to
Canada.
call the TPS?
Yeah, call the police. Call them. All right, I want everyone to know that you are banning people from getting food in Canada. You are banning. This is unacceptable.
You can
cannot
get food
prevent
from
people from
outside
getting
by
food and
making a
feeding
list.
themselves.
This is a private property. You are trespassing a private property. You need to leave right now
You need
without
to go.
vaccination.
All right,
That is the
you're
law I'm
promoting
telling you.
segregation, huh?
You can order a guide.
Trespassing against private property is not a segregation. You need to leave right now.
No, this is segregation. You say I can't
You
get
can go
food because I'm not
outside.
getting
There are
vaccinated.
people who want to come in who are vaccinated.
Oh, congratulations. So promote segregation. Don't let people buy food. No, you chill out.
There you go. It's not hard to see how this is taking off everywhere you go and everywhere you turn around. But if you didn't think it could happen in America, think again. I want to bring out a bill that came out actually January of this year, almost a year ago that actually came out. This is in New York City. Now, this article is out of WorldNet Daily, so I spent some time last night and early this morning before I actually bring this out to verify that this is an actual true story, and it is. New York laws being proposed behind closed doors. This has been on the books now for almost a year that they're going to be voting on this sometime next month. This is what the bill says. It's Bill A416. Presents a serious risk to basic liberties of all Americans in the state of New York, including their right to choose whether or not to receive medical treatment and vaccinations related to thus far undetermined contagious disease. Now, that's the quote of what's going on that came out last year at the beginning of 2021, is that they were preparing a bill to be able to lock people away if they didn't want to cooperate. So when American mayors, governors, and others wanted to vaccinate their populations to submit to COVID-19 lockdown and other orders, they were forced with what they perceived was an obstacle. Those individuals who simply would not want to follow orders. Or another way to put it, you didn't want to get vaccinated. Suppose it was a religious objection. Suppose it was a health issue. Either way, if you didn't follow the orders and you didn't get the vaccinations, what they began to determine in advance, how do they deal with unruly people? Now, we've been talking about this for a couple of years, and we bring us back always into Europe pre-war, when Hitler took power, when they began to actually look into those who were not going to cooperate with the government. They had intern camps to put them away before they ever went after the Jews. And they put thousands and thousands of people away. And you think here in America that can't happen because of our Constitution. Well, they have bypassed the Constitution now for the last couple of years. Now, in the state of New York, a proposal is being prepared for lawmakers to consider that would resolve that dispute. In other words, if they don't want to take the shot, they don't want to take the jab as they're calling it, what do? Again, lock them up behind the fences. There was a plan that's pre-filed, actually January of this year, It was pre-filed for the coming legislation, which allow authorities to simply determine who they wanted to lock up and then lock them up. In other words, this bill is so open-handed. I went through and I looked at it. I was going through it line by line. I didn't have time to really study it very, very carefully, but everything I read in it so far, it gave the authority to the government to make the decision if you're a threat to society because of your health conditions. Now, I'm calling this the Trojan horse. Trojan horse HR 550. This is the immunization infrastructure for the Modernization Act of 2021. Now, that sounds really, really good. All right, so here's what the government's building. An infrastructure for the vaccines. What New York is doing, in case someone who doesn't want to follow this vaccine mandate, they will have the authority to decide to put them away, lock them up till they deem them fit to go back to society, that they're not going to be a health problem. Well, you didn't think it could happen here, but it is. But it has been happening in Australia, in Europe, and in Canada. Now you see it's on the books. It could possibly happen here in the very near future. This new Trojan horse, they're appropriating $400 million to establish this new federal vaccination database. Now here's the problem. Let me see if I can go ahead and bring this up, all right? Here's the problem, all right? This is what we looked at in 2017, all right, 2017, 2016. We call this America's Trojan horse, the box of evil. This is what we brought out after the federal government approved same-sex marriage. And we said that that was simply the door to open everything else that comes after that. So now we're saying that this new bill, the new vaccination structure plan, is another ruse just like this was. So let me show you what happens with this. It breaks down the very fabric and the core of sin in mankind. It's like Adam's sin in our time. Remember the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. When you break the commandment of man and woman, you have broken down and followed an authority that is other than God's. There's a way that seems right to man, but the end thereof is death. In Genesis 1:26, God says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful and multiply. The very fact that a male marrying a male, or vice versa, female and female, produces death. They cannot produce their own children. So what they have to do is create a way to begin to bring in kids into the family, the adoption agencies, to be able to work with this. So then you're taking a system that's built around what God said from the very creation and created a problem now that everything behind it now begins to break down. Matthew 6 says, no man can serve two masters. Either we do it the way God says or we don't. For either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the others. So that's what we're seeing right now. If you maintain the integrity of God's holy word, you'll find that you're being hated by society at large. So now, look what Elijah told the king and all the people in his day. And Elijah came to all the people and said, how long will you halt between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him. So why am I telling you all this today? What has this got to do with that bill? I'm going to show you something in a few minutes, and we're going to connect this entire show together as we begin to lock it up with the covenant. How long can you halt between two opinions? The Christian society at large understands the United States is in deep peril. They understand that we have abandoned their God, but the problem is they're continuing to try to bring us back to God, a renewal, a revival, a repentance, without repenting of this broken law of same-sex marriage. They'll allude to it, but they will not come out and condemn it just like they're doing abortion. Now, I'm going to come to that in just a few minutes. Now, this is the foundation, and that's the rouge of hiding everything, as we brought out a couple years ago. You cannot serve God and mammon. The Supreme Court threw down the dividing line as a nation just a few years ago. The decision was made to America was no longer be able to halt between two opinions. Excuse me. So if you decide to follow man's law, then you must accept, approve, work with, and support the LGBTQ movement, or you can be fined, and eventually you will be put in jail. All right, so that's the foundation. This is showing how fast things begin to change. Same way with these laws. If this new law goes into effect with this new Trojan horse, at any time there's a new breakout that they feel is very serious, they will have the structure, the money, and the power to begin to put people away that they deem is a problem for our society. On the same day of the decision, this came out in the news, so if you look at the date on that, this is June 26, 2015. That is the very day the Supreme Court passed the law. The crowds of Stonewall Inn celebrate gay rights victory decades in the making. A quote, "I hope we're able to parlay this into doing more systematic reform to uplift our entire community." In other words, that's just the beginning. So what we have to do is we have to parlay this into something else. We need to do a better job of incorporating other members in our community and uplifting transgender voices. So once you broke down the man and the woman, all bets are off on everything. Now they had the freedom to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, change whatever they wanted to change, and mandate the laws that will affect those who don't accompany the change. Pedophilia, a sexual orientation like being straight or gay. That was the next step that came out in 2016. A pedophile has the same ingrained attraction that a heterosexual female feels toward a male, psychiatrist said. Pedophilia is a sexual orientation like being straight or gay, according to the criminal psychologist. So you see how this continues to morph into more and more evil. So now, we have a new Trojan horse. And you can see what's happened to our society in just 7 years. Actually, next year makes it a full 7 years. So now, let's get back to this Trojan horse and the $400 million for states to implement the bill. So as I went through this, I was trying to define a way to make it a little simpler because it gets to be kind of complicated the way it's written. But here's what they said. To carry out this section, there has to be authorized, appropriated to state, local, and tribal authorities to remain available until expended. And all it's telling you in their slogan is we're going to have $400 million and you can use it till we run out. And they're going to give it to the state, the local, and the tribal. So people are saying, well, this isn't federal. Well, it's federal money that's building this. But to buy any of that money, to get any of that money, local jurisdictions all over the country are going to have to agree to certain data standards. Now, we got $400 million here, but this is what you're going to have to do if you want to participate with that money. The bill implementation, January 28, 2021. Notice that this is last year, too, in January, just like the other bill was in New York. Now, this is the bill that went in the sponsors. But before I go into that white document you see here, I want to show you a video, and this is from Dan Crenshaw. Now, for those who know Dan Crenshaw, he's a military, Afghanistan, Iraq, and he's a very conservative Christian. And he's got a video out, which is very disturbing. Let's play that video.
Okay, real talk. Time to debunk some lies from our own side this time. So this one's about the vaccine database that you keep hearing about. Like, that's what got voted on in Congress, and people are mad because some Republicans voted for it, some didn't. All right, here's the truth on it. Every Republican up here, by the way, knows that that particular bill, which was Republican-led, actually makes it harder to track vaccine information on the individual level. It actually decreases the amount of money that was originally allocated for these systems by the Biden administration. So let's back up. Let me tell you the full story. There are something called immunization information systems at every state. These have long existed. In the American Rescue Plan, passed entirely by Democrats, no Republicans voted for it, they added about $500 million to that system and told states to, quote, make them better, right? They didn't put any guardrails, they didn't put any details, they just said make them better. Now, this worried Republicans because we're worried about these authoritarian blue state governors that indeed do want to track your data and do want to employ vaccine mandates and passports and the such. And so there was a Republican-led effort for this exact provision to decrease the funding for it and ensure that if states take that money, they have to make the data anonymous and only collect it at the population level so that you can't be tracked. So the Republicans screaming about this bill, saying it's bad, it does the exact opposite of what they're saying. And they know that, but they also don't like explaining votes to you. That's the truth.
All right, now, I try to do the very best I can at bringing you a fair and honest program built upon the Word of God. Everything you just said is a Republican slant, and everything he told you has got a half-truth in it. And that's a real issue here, because you see, if you listen to that, you'll think that this is a good bill. This is not a good bill. And true, the Republicans did fight and lead an effort to reduce the money because it was $500 million at first. Now it's only $400 million. This bill was brought in by a Democrat, as you see me circle that box. This is a Democratic bill, and keeping your name anonymous is absolutely untrue. And while it's true, it's not a federal database. Let me show you how they put the wording in it that's coming through that's going to be of a real concern. This has already passed the House. All right, so if you look right here, it gives you the steps that it's got to go through. So it was brought in last year, introduced a year ago. They've had time to look at it. They've been working on it. Now it's out of the House, it's going to the Senate. This is some of the talking points, is that no federal vaccine mandate. This is what Dan Crenshaw is saying. There's no federal vaccine database. It puts you in charge of your health care data, not Biden. Everything here that they're talking about is only half true. Let me show you why. States are going to be required to share the data to others on a national level. That's the problem. So this is the reason for this, and all the money is for each one of the states to build a stronger base and a computer base to hire people to be able to share this with others. Let me show you. All right, number one, health information on the technological standards. The Secretary may not grant a grant or cooperative agreement under subsection 1A1B unless the application uses or agrees to use the standards adopted by the Secretary under Section 304. Don't you love the way they write things? Here's part of that section. First, improving secure data collection, transmission, bidirectional exchange, maintenance, and analysis of immunization information. In other words, they have to improve how they collect the data, how they transmit the data, and they have to have a way that it goes both ways, from the government back to the state. So everything's going to be intertwined in all the records and all the documentation of every single state who wants a part of that money, and you know they will, Republican and Democrat, to help them operate to keep themselves out of the red. Right there, the bidirectional exchange and maintenance of immunization information. So there'll be no way that this is not going to get to the federal government. So what are the federal government going to do? You think they're going to keep it separated state by state? No, they're going to build one central database built upon the information that's coming from the states. The states have to give it to them if they want to be a part of this program. Now, I've got this here. I'm going to bold this out a little bit. It's called the Improving of the Secure Bidirectional Exchange of Immunization, Record Data Among Federal, and I highlighted federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and entities and non-government entities. So this is the reason for it, is to improve how they're going to bring all the information to the federal level. So in that video, what that gentleman is not telling us is the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Now, if we'd have just started with the video, we'd say, yeah, well, this is a good deal. But it's not. Unfortunately, pretty much everybody in government will slant things to their favor to be able to get across what it is they're after. Now, this is a real problem here. Requirements to secure the grants. Now, watch this. To report to Congress not later than 1 year after the enactment of this section, no later than 1 year afterwards, the Secretary shall submit a report to the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, Pensions, and of the Senate and the Committee on Energy and Commerce of the House of Representatives. That includes, now, they got to send that to Congress. That's going to federal. They're required to send it to them within 1 year. A description of any barriers. In other words, at the end of 1 year, if there's something that's keeping you from giving the federal government money, we want to know about it. Your information. That's what they're looking for. If you can't give them the information, you're not going to get the money. Look at this. Here's a description to a barrier. Any public health authority implementing inoperable immunization or information systems. In other words, if there's a barrier that you can't get this stuff working, we want to know about it. Another barrier, the exchange of information pursuant to immunization records. Did you just get that? If there's a barrier that keeps you from giving us the records of the immunizations, we want to know about it. Do you see how this is working? This is in the document that just got passed out of the House. Here's another one. Any description of a barrier that's reporting by any healthcare professional authorized under the state law using such immunization information systems as appropriate and pursuant to state law, or the description of barriers that hinder the effective establishment of a network of support immunizations reporting and monitoring. So no, this is a federal database, whether they want to call it that or not, whether people want to deny it or not. But here's what's going on. Remember the Trojan horse I told you about. This bill opens up the door for all records dealing with health. No longer is your health going to be private. Any state that accepts any of this money are going to be required by law to take the information, especially the immunization, and send it to the federal government. So that when a law like New York is passed, that if you're the problem and you're a health issue, lock them up. Can you see what's coming? All of this is leading to a mark of the beast scenario of buying and selling. You wonder how in the world we ever get to that stage? Well, you're living through it right now, right now. H.R. 550, the Trojan horse. Is this the prelude to the mark of the beast? I think so. Everything they're doing today is a foundation for what can happen in the future. We showed you that video from Canada. You can't come in, you're not vaccinated, no food for you. What happens to in every single store if you go online and they ask you for a number, your immunization number, and if you don't have it, they can't bring you food. It's all coming. Revelation 13, verse 16 to 17. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or on their foreheads, that no man may be able to buy or to sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So how long is that going to be? I don't know. What other transformations we're going to see? We don't know that either. But one thing we know, we need to pay attention to what's going on, because everything here that you're seeing in these bills is laying the foundations for how far and how fast they can pass bills to change society as we know it. Now, at the same time, there's a base of Christians around the country who know there's something wrong with the nation and around the world. The renewal is called 2022, a spiritual solution to the state of affairs of our nation. They say it's the answer to America's problems. Well, is it? All right, last week we brought in a few slides, and we were talking about this beast-looking power that you see here in that little foggy picture. That's actually at the UN. At the entrance to the UN, they call it the Guardian, to protect us and keep us safe. Rather than having God, they keep focusing on things. Notice what it says here, and this was from Revelation. And it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. So we know that's where Satan is going. Christian society at large. Now, when I bring this section out, I want to be really careful, because I want you to follow what I'm saying here, because I believe at this renewal, the people who are attending there, I believe they're trying to do what they honestly believe is right before God. They know there's something wrong with this nation. They know that this nation has discarded God, and they're trying to find a way to bring God back into our society. So this is not to condemn what they're doing. I want you to follow through with what I'm about to say. The problem lies in this. Can God be untrue to himself? Of course not. He has to be true to himself or else all men are liars. There's no truth into it. So if you come to God with paganism, with practices that are not of his, that are practices of Baal or others, can God approve that? Of course not. The problem is our society does not understand the religion we have today is not the religion that you find in the Bible. It's been adopted, it's been corrupted, and it has been counterfeited and been passed on from generation to generation to generation. All right, so now, with that said, let's go through this next section. This is what the renewal says: a spiritual solution to America in crisis. Everyone knows that we have a problem and we need to have God into our lives again. January 8, 2022 will mark the historic faith-based heritage event called The Renewal, restoring America's founding covenant. So I'm going to stop there just a second. If you go to any Christian, and I want you to try it, ask them, what is America's covenant with God? I'm looking at our team. I'm just everybody. Go to a Christian-based house and ask them, what is America's founding covenant? They'll not be able to tell you. They won't be able to tell you. And the reason is they don't know who America is. If you don't understand your foundation of who you you cannot understand the covenant that God made with you. All right, you with me? All right, let's go further. Restoring America's founding covenant with leaders gathered from across the country at the Strawberry Festival Amphitheater in Plant City, Florida. Most people don't understand the true covenant with God is for America. I'm going to cover that in our in and I portion when we come back after the break. Now, what is the renewal? All right, so what are they doing? What's the renewal? They're calling it a 5-step process. The renewal is a spiritual solution to the current state of affairs in our land. Recovenanting and reconciliation combine to be the next biblical step in the 5-step renewal process. Is that the way we get God? There's a simple step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and God's back in our picture. Is that the way God works? According to this is the plan that they have. Now, in essence, there's a process that follows once a person's repented and God is in your life. You cannot make the steps. God has to grant the steps. Repentance, reconciliation, restoration, revival, and reformation for the faithful remnant to usher in the mercy of the Lord. This is what the Bible says. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end there are the ways of death. So now, is that what the Bible teaches? It's not so much the process that there's a problem in this, it's the understanding of what sin is. In other words, you can't have God in your life and walking you through and bringing you to a perfect Christian like this mind in us like is in Christ if you don't know what to repent of. See, that's the issue. Look at 2 Corinthians 7 through 14, chapter 7, verse 14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. This is a scripture that's quoted continually by these movements. They understand that there must be a repentance and a humility for God to come in. That there's a problem. Many are going to say to me, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, and in your name have cast out devils or demons, and in your name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you that work iniquity. Somewhere between this and this, there's a breakdown in America and in a society toward God. All right? Look what Deuteronomy 7 says. In its basic statements, just 2 verses. First, Know therefore that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, which keeps covenant. There we have covenant, right? What are they doing? They're trying to restore the covenant to America with mercy that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. There you go. That is your starting point. If you want to renew the covenant that God has, it has to start with keeping the commandments. You cannot keep 9 of them. You have to keep 10 of them. The very basic is that when you come to God with a Sunday worship or worship of the sun that was brought in 325 years after Jesus Christ was on this earth, which moved the Sabbath day, where Jesus says, I am Lord of the Sabbath. Exodus 31 says, remember the Sabbath day. He said, this is the sign between me and you, and it is the 7th day. It's not any day of the week. There is your starting point, that you will keep the commandments of God. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. This society will not keep the commandments of God. They substitute the Christian way of life today of Sunday worship, the worship after the sun god that was brought into Christianity and adopted. And it was changed by the Catholic Church with no authority. Now, it goes on. I'm going to give you one more verse, and we're going to move on. Verse 11, same chapter. I just skipped verse 10. Therefore, you shall keep the commandments and the statutes and the judgments which I command to you this day. So there you have it. There's laws, there's statutes, and there's judgments, and you're required by God to keep them all the way through to the New Testament and all the way through to Revelation. That never changes. All right, so there's the breakdown, is that while you try to get close to God, you're bringing to God a pagan way of life. I know it sounds cruel. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to bring out the truth here, so bear with how we go through this. Remember what the Apostle Paul said on Mars Hill. Now, Paul waited for them in Athens, and his spirit was stirred in him, and he saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Paul then stood up in the meeting of Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious. When I look at this convention, as Paul says, I see they're very religious. They're bringing religious leaders from around the world. They're trying to motivate people. They're trying to bring them back to God. The problem is, just like these people on Morris Hill, they don't know the way back to God because they don't see where they're wrong. He said, for as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with an inscription to the unknown God. So you are ignorant in the very thing that you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you today. That is our goal with this convention coming up, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. Because the people who are there, just like they are with Paul was on Mars Hill, they're trying to worship God. The problem is, he says, look, you don't understand what you're doing. He says, let me tell you about where you lack. That's what he was trying to do. He didn't go there and to create a condemnation. Let me show you something. And again, this is not to condemn, but it's showing you people who are trying to get close to God, how they bring in a religion that's not of God, that God can only condemn. Here's one. Look at this one. Friday night, it's called Messiah Mass, the Christmas Eve candlelight celebration. Messiah Mass. See now, so what they're trying to do here, they understand that Christmas is not of God. But they know the people keep Christmas, so they're trying to bring the Messiah into something he never was and never will be. And he's going to come back, he's going to destroy it. So now, let's go a little further here. If we're going to go back to the covenant made with this nation and God, do you know that when America was founded, it was against the law to keep Christmas? You can't go back and covenant with something you were never in. See, but they don't know it. This world does not know the way of God, the way God says, because it has been given a counterfeit. So where did I get this? You with me on this page? Now watch this. Don't miss this special Christmas Eve in worship and candlelight, a special word from Jonathan. This is on Jonathan Cahn's website. All of those who believe, all these religious leaders and these people motivate tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and he sold millions of books. that rabbi maintains Christmas. It's on his website. This is from the Jerusalem Center, Beth Israel. So now, if the leaders of our religious order are giving us a way that's not of God, until someone tells them, they don't know any different. With that, this renewal in 2022, we're planning, and I'm going to ask for your prayers and your support with this. We're planning there to have a booth on January 8th, 2022, at this faith-based renewal of restoring America's founding covenant with our leaders. And we want to have a booth, and we're going to have giveaways. And God willing, and we ask your prayers to help God direct people to our booth. And it's possible there'd be thousands and thousands of people there to be able to give away as much information, to open the door to lay the foundation or a seed that God may use to bring these people to the true faith that you and I understand. It's not going there to condemn, but to try to convert those who are trying to follow God who don't know the way of God. All right. This is just a list of some of the people who's going to be there. You got Ben Carson, Michelle Bachman, Jonathan Kahn, you got David Barton. And you can pause this if you want and go through and look at this. Even Mike Lindell, the pillow guy, is going to be there. They have some of the biggest representations in our nation, all in one spot. And for the first time that we've been trying to do this for 7 years, they opened the door and they're going to let us have a booth. And we want to be right there in the middle of all this. And said, let us tell you what God says about your covenant and who you are. All right, let's take a break. All right, when I come back, I'm going to tell you about that covenant, God's covenant for America. But before we do, let's take a look at this video, Out of Control. All righty, welcome back. As you can see, we have a lot to cover today. Now, let's get into that covenant part that they're talking about going back to. Now, this could be a very complicated segment, but I don't want to go into complication today. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible to lay the foundation of what's going on and why. So now, let's go into this. The Abrahamic covenant. Most people today have no idea that America's blessings and what we're going through as a nation, what our founders who came to this nation over 400 years ago, and when they began to put everything together, they do not realize that the covenant in this nation is tied all the way back to Abraham. In Genesis 15, verses 7 and 18, and he said, I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land to inherit it. In the same day that the Lord had made a covenant with Abram, saying, unto your seed I have given this land from the river Egypt into the great river, the river Euphrates. So what God was saying, as far as you could see, from north, east, south, and west, all that land is going to be given to your children, to your inheritance, who's going to be coming after you. All right? The covenant is fulfilled in two parts. First, when God rescues Israel out of Egypt, and second, the rescue of the remnant the second time, which is in a new land. Now, a lot of people don't realize it. They believe that when the children of Israel came out of Egypt after that 400 years, being a captive in a bondage in Egypt, when God brought them out, when they crossed that Jordan, they went into the promised land. That's where Israel was established. Of course, that's where Abraham was. And God says, everywhere you can see, it's going to be yours. That is the type, that is the form, the physical of the promised land. But most people don't understand that that was just the beginning. You see, God's going to have to bring his people back a second time. God's going to redo what he did before and to bring us to a spiritual fulfillment of what's going on. Because watch this verse, 2 Samuel chapter 7. And it came to pass when the king was dwelling in his house that the Lord had given him rest from all his enemies, that the king said to Nathan, now we're talking about King David. The king said to Nathan, the prophet, see now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells inside of tents and curtains. So what David was trying to do is build a house for God. He didn't feel right that he was in a house and God was still living in a tent. So he wanted to build a house for God. And Nathan said to the king, go and do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you. And you know, he couldn't actually build it. He was a bloody man. So he brought everything together. He laid the foundation for when his son Solomon would actually build the house. But here's the part I want to get to in verse 10. When God told him that, they were in the promised land already. And this is what God says, back to David and to Nathan. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, and they will dwell in a place of their own, that they may dwell in a place of their own and move no more. So when God was talking to David, he was in the promised land. But God's telling him, I'm going to move them. In other words, this isn't your permanent setting. I'm going to be moving you. So where they were at was the physical type for the land of the Israelites. Now, people think today over in Israel that all that land is all Israel, it's all the tribes, but it's not. See, the lost tribes of Israel are still out there. The United States is one of those tribes, the tribe of Joseph. Us and Great Britain, Ephraim and Manasseh, received the blessings that God gave back then. Look at Revelation 21. But even where we are in the land we are today is only a type of the fulfillment that comes in Revelation 21. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. Then I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. The ultimate conclusion of that verse in type was given to the United States and Great Britain, and is going to be fulfilled with the new heaven and a new earth. And they'll move no more. But until that time, we're in that stage of transition. Now, in Genesis 49, the Abrahamic covenant was passed on to the lineage after him. God promised a double portion. If you go back and you read the prophetic fulfillment of what had to come that God laid way back in Genesis, it says God promised a double portion of the blessings upon the descendants of Joseph, a future land flowing with the blessings like that of the promised land. When you look at the face of the earth, there is no other nation on the face of the earth that fulfill those promises other than Great Britain and especially the United States. To be blessings of the abundance of land and sea and air and all the animals and everything that's in it. There's never been a country like the United States. And that's what we're looking at today. To restore the covenant that wants to be done at this renewal, until they understand this concept, that covenant cannot be brought back in. And that's what we want to try to bring in the future. The United States would eventually become greater than his older brother in Great Britain. So now, the Abrahamic covenant, this is what we said. Know with certainty that the descendants will be strangers in the land that's not theirs. And eventually that's what's going to happen to us right here in the United States. The second part of the covenant, that they would be in land that's not theirs, after 400 years, that God would come back and gather them a second time. The Bible's filled in typology, type, antitype, former, and latter. In fact, we know the end from the beginning, as God says. So what we're looking at, just like the Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years, so will be God's people before God returns. At the end of 400 years, and we know that began back in 1620 and then in 1630. As we look at that covenant they brought into America, they actually believed that they were building a new Jerusalem in their time. The 1620 Mayflower and Maypac. The Pilgrims came to America believing they were fulfilling a covenant of a new Jerusalem. If you look at the writings and the foundations of our country, they realized what they were doing is God inspired them to believe that they were keeping a new covenant or restoring the covenant that God had given to Abraham. No other nation on the face of the earth fulfilled those promises other than Great Britain and the United States. If you look around, look at the blessings and go and try to find that. So now, with all that said, now let's look at some of the concerns and the warnings. The Declaration of Independence. On God's calendar, that day of the year, July 4, 1776, came as a day of warning. It was called Tammuz 17. The 17th of Tammuz was a day mourning for Jewish people. It marks the anniversary of 5 calamities. So when God reestablished his covenant with his people and gave us this land that we began, he allowed the United States to be founded on the very day was a day of calamity, Tammuz 17, on God's calendar. Why is that important for us? Because it's a reminder that it was God who gave us the blessings. But if we ever turned our backs on God, in fact, George Washington said that in his first inaugural address. If we ever turned our backs on God, heaven help this nation. And so you look at the very foundation of God is this Tammuz 17, and it's God saying, go back and look what happened to those who came before you. One of the very first of Tammuz 17 is this. Israel's sin of building the golden calf to worship when Moses delayed his coming down from the mountain. In other words, you can't come to God and bring a pagan worship, no different than the people who will be at this convention who keeping Christmas and Easter and all the sinful ways that the children of Israel were introduced to when they were in Egypt. God says, come out of her, my people. So it's the same way that until we come to God in spirit and in truth, God will not listen to us. Those 2 more dates that bring in the destruction of Israel's temples in the Old Testament and in the New. Look at Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. It says, this day I call heaven and earth as a witness against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life that you and your children may live. We are being brought to a period of time before the return of Jesus Christ that God is again laying that stipulation before all of those who are trying to reach him. He says, I'm choosing for you. Choose life or death. We talked about the Trojan horse. We talked about the Supreme Court dropping the gauntlet, dividing the people. God's doing the same thing. There are 4 times that God has revealed in the heavens the events on earth of blessings and cursings. One of those times was in the writing of the heavens that was recorded for us for this day, the end time generation. Let's see. The 4 times that God has revealed these heavens and these events of the earth, blessings and curses. 2 of them announced in rejection of God and Israel. So what am I saying here? In other words, God's telling us at the end time, you got to make a choice. Choose blessings or cursing, choose life or death. And what he's saying here in Deuteronomy, he says, look, I wrote them in the heavens. 2 times in the heavens is the rejection of God, and 2 times announced the coming of God or Jesus Christ. One of those times written in heaven is recorded for us today to choose life or death. So now, let me begin to explain real quickly now as we begin to wrap this up. The 2 times that was written in the heavens that we can see in the destruction of the temples was 586 BC and in 70 AD. So what are you looking at there? All right, so in that pictures that you're looking at there is what we read in Revelation chapter 12 with the woman. And she was crowned with a crown and had the 12 stars. So you see all of that written. you see very similar patterns laid out in the heavens, and there's only 4 times you can find this. The first was the temple falling in 586, that began on Tammuz 9, and then in the New Testament in 70 AD, that fell on Tammuz 17. Both of those temples were gone by the 9th of Av. They both fell. That was recorded when you begin to see these things written in the heavens, when God says choose life or death. There are 2 times which announce the coming of Christ. 3 BC, and then, of course, 2017 AD, which we covered thoroughly. And you begin to look at those. If you go back, and I'm going to bring a picture up in just a second, that's on our website that you can go back into the heavens. So here God says choose life or death. He wrote them in the heavens, and he marked them for us to be able to see at the end time. So looking at this, what are we looking at here? We covered this in great detail in the prophetic alignment of the stars. That's online, and you can go look at it, and goes into depth what you're looking at in Revelation chapter 12. Both of the events in the 3 BC and 2017 AD in our time, both of them marks the coming of Jesus Christ. So now we see that, so God's telling you and I, you got to make a choice. Choose life. If you've never seen that video, or if you haven't looked at it in a few years, go back with the information that you understand today and look what God's done for you and I. He wrote it in the heavens for you and I, and he's telling us today, choose life. All right, so now let's begin to wrap this up. For Christmas, if you've never seen these before, we have December 25th, the day of the invincible sun. It is online as part of what we call a trilogy here of the biblical mystery of God's counterfeit religion. You have Mardi Gras and you have Easter. All 3 of these are all interwoven into our society and have become a part of Christianity, which has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. Not a single one of the mainstay or the pillars of Christianity. In the mail last week, less of me, more of Christ. Actually, I think that's going out this week. All right, that's going out this week. I didn't change that. And then also we're going to be sending out a News Nuggets and Insights, December 3rd edition of News Nuggets and Insights, talking about this generation shall not pass till all of these things be fulfilled. Also, go online if you've never seen it. This is a little older. America's Trojan Horse, Pandora's Box of Evil. So if we can understand how Satan does things, it'll protect us in the future. Well, that's it. A lot of information. I probably had too much at the tail end to go into the detail that I wanted. But take some time, go look at those videos and those sermons. I'm telling you, they're going to enlighten you. All right. Our closing video today is Psalms of Worship. Take a look, and I'll be right back. back. Well, that's it for our programs today. As you've seen, there's a lot of information to cover. We got a big work ahead of all of us. And God's calling you to be a part of that work. To be able to cry aloud and to spare not. He says, show my people my sins. And God willing, we can do that with all the love, the mercy, and the sincerity that God can place in us. And remember now, just 2 weeks away, this is the very first opportunity that we've really been invited to be able to have a booth. We have volunteers. We have Chuck Baker and his family coming down from Florida. We have some volunteers from New Orleans who are going to be there. Maybe our own ministers here, Clayton Evans and Bobby Weber is looking forward to trying to get down there themselves. We just found out about it. We got a lot to talk about. We got a lot of coordination, and we're going to pass out a lot of information. So remember, keep this in your prayers, that it can be successful, that we can lay the seeds and begin a foundation for an outreach that we've never had before. Keep that in mind and share that with everyone you know. And don't forget, share that with everyone you know, because they're going to love you for it, or not. Till next week, God be with you.